I did get some questions from some proactive members of the community as well that I'm happy to tackle. So one of the really good questions were, what are some of the skills that product managers always need to be assessing and improving? There were a number of questions around hiring. People are interested in what it looks like to get evaluated for being hired at a place like Google or Facebook as a product manager. There were some questions on KPIs, managing teams. And then I had also some thoughts on seniority that I wanted to share with people. That gets a little bit into the level-based rubrics that you mentioned. Everybody on the call knows I actually developed this course at Google called The Path to Product Manager, and it was intended to be for people who are not yet on the product management ladder, who are trying to figure out whether or not it made sense for them to explore moving from whatever job function they were in into product management. Part of it was to prepare them for the interview. Part of it was to prepare them for the job, and part of it was to dissuade them. This is probably something you don't want to do. And that actually can be really useful, because I feel like one of the problems that product management has had in the last couple of years is that it's been idolized as sort of like, oh, the PM is the CEO of the product, and CEO means the big boss person, so I want to be that person, right? That's the career goal. And then people who work hard on that sometimes get there and they realize, hey, this is actually not all that great or that glamorous. It doesn't pay better. I don't get more respect. If anything, I have to fight more. And so I think it's really important to set expectations clearly about what product management actually does and doesn't look like, especially at a large company, so that people aren't getting into it for the wrong reasons, right? Because I think there are the right reasons to want to get into PM and the wrong reasons to get into PM. So anyhow, I developed this course and gave a couple different iterations of it, strictly internal to Google. So not a lot of people outside of Google have seen this content, but I'm interested in starting to explore getting some of this content in the hands of more people, just so people know what this is all about. And in particular, it sounds like in this group of people who've signed up for this webinar, there's some amount of interest in the interviewing part in terms of what looks good and what doesn't look good in a PM interview. I've got some pretty strong and opinionated advice on this, but just it's a data point of one, and different people think about this process differently. I was on the Google product management hiring committee, so one of the people who decides who we hire and who we don't. I also helped create the Google Cloud product management hiring committee as one of the founding members there, and help Google come up with these kind of level-based rubrics for how we assess product managers. So it's something that I care a lot about, and I have some opinions about. But just because something really important is just because I have an opinion about a thing doesn't mean it's Google's opinion or that it's Facebook's opinion. So this is just one guy and one voice. So I just want to put that disclaimer on things. But if you're interested, I can jump right into some of my thoughts there and the advice that I have for people who are interviewing for the product management position. So this was basically the internal deck that we discussed and shared at Google. Strictly informal. It's like I came up with this with a couple other PMs, so this was not a kind of a formal deck. So we're going to have to breeze through this. At Google, it's especially confusing because there's a bunch of different job titles. There's product manager, technical program manager, and tech lead. And so it's important to distinguish between those. At the end of the day, the product manager is responsible for the overall experience by users. So if anything is terrible about it, it is the fault of the PM is the right way to think about that. A bunch of people are curious about what a PM's life looks like, and a PM at a large company is in back-to-back meetings. And so you might reasonably ask the question, how the heck do I actually get anything done? And the answer is you basically either need to block time on your calendar, or you need to get it done as a second shift, basically after everyone has gone home and you're not in the middle of meetings. Then you can actually get some work done. So for a PM, one of the biggest blessings you can do is you can cancel a meeting last minute, because then they can actually, they've had that time blocked out and they can get some work done. But it is a lot of meetings as a large company PM. And that's even with saying no a lot. You'll notice that a lot of these calendar events are X'd out. And a lot of it is representing who, not only the user, but also anyone else who isn't in the room. So other people, as they come to trust you to represent their input and opinion, will realize that they don't need to show up to quite so many meetings. And if you do a good job at relaying information there, then that's really helpful to everyone. You can help the overall team get more done versus everyone being in meetings all the time, which would be a great recipe for nobody ever getting anything done. So I found it helpful to share like a little bit of my day, that generally wake up at 7, focus on the family and getting the kid off to school, would drive into work. My commute now is 20 seconds because I'm starting my latest company. I literally work out of my garage in my backyard. So it's a Silicon Valley garage startup. So I've got a real improvement in commute there. But then it's largely meetings most of the day, as you can see here, from 9 a.m. to 5:30, get back home, put Max down. And then often it's that hour and a half from like 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. Where I'd be able to get some work done, catch up on email, or like that if things weren't on fire, I could go and have people over. And then something Google did a pretty good job of, to be honest, was not messing with people's weekends. So weekends really can be family time. But then Sunday night is usually when things rev back up. So in terms of PM skills, it's basically all of the responsibility with none of the authority. And so this is where people who get into PM because they feel like PMs are the CEO of the product are maybe deluding themselves, because they don't actually have hiring and firing authority over the people who are doing the work, right? So that's something to think about there. And you basically have to give everyone else the credit for the work getting done, because if good things get done, it means that you failed to screw things up. So yeah. One important thing that doesn't get mentioned like in school a lot is that in the real world, in the business world, people don't care very much about exactly what did you do. They don't care as much about that. They care a lot more what did you cause to get done. And so kind of your job as the PM is to make the product successful and to make the team of people who are working on the product successful, and to be that empowering and enabling force behind everything, versus feeling like you have to do everything and then letting important things fall through the cracks. That said, you are the backstop for the team. So it's you are where the buck stops. So if anything didn't get done, it's your fault. So you may actually need to wear a fair number of hats, and that part is similar to startup life. Okay. So you have to be the voice of the user. That's been well covered in other areas, and you need to make sure the product is actually doing something useful for the overall business. It needs to be something that people actually want. And you need to be connecting different people within the organization, like I mentioned, being the empty chair. It's very important to actually get as much surface area contact with users as possible. It seems like most people on this call are not in Silicon Valley, so you don't need this bit, but Silicon Valley is a little bit of a bubble. There's sort of common ways of thinking here that are different than how people think elsewhere. But that also means that if you're making products for people outside of Silicon Valley, it's really important to actually connect with those people outside of Silicon Valley. And I'm going to skip over a bunch of this sort of generic product advice here, because most of this you will have heard from other places, and it sounded like the interest here is around how PMs are evaluated. So we're just going to skip ahead to this section. So a lot of the things that we're evaluated on, like it actually comes down to empathy. Do you care? Do you care about other people? Because if you just care about your appearance, if you just care about code looking beautiful, if you just care about interfaces and designs being lovely, but you don't really care about what problems your end user has, and you can't convince other people that you care about them, you're probably not going to be a great product manager, at least for the kind of a typical consumer PM sort of a role. So your big job is to care about other people and to show that you care about other people and that you understand their pain points. So oftentimes customers will have opinions about what a good solution looks like, And a very junior PM will say, oh, great. And they'll go and take those things and they'll size them out with engineering and they'll prioritize them and then they'll get them done. It's like, that's product management, right? You listen to the customer, they tell you what to build, you figure out what parts need to be built, and then you get it built, right? And that's mediocre product management. Great product management is, customers come to you and they tell you what they want you to build. And you ask, okay, thank you. And you take notes on that. You say, tell me about why you need that. What were you trying to get done? What was behind that? And if you capture enough of those data points, you start seeing that there are underlying trends behind those requests, that there's underlying commonalities in the pain points. And this part's really interesting as well, that there may be things that people need to do that they don't know to ask for. So humans are really adaptable, right? We develop calluses really, really quickly. I do rowing, so you can see I've got a callus there. And that means that we quickly become desensitized to pain points. And so sometimes we don't even see the pain that we're feeling because we're just used to it. And it's part of the annoyance of doing business. And part of your job as a PM is to see the calluses, to not just hear what the vocalized pain points are, but also to see like what's behind that and what are problems that could be solved that someone doesn't even realize to ask about. So anyhow, in terms of how we evaluate PMs, both for hiring as well as on the job, you need to be able to show that you understand your customer, you understand your customer's pain points, and you're out there working on delivering real solutions for them. Something that can be really helpful here as an exercise is to look around your environment and think of ways that it could be better concretely, right? And this is the magic product one, right? So either for services and products that you're already using, to be asking yourself, how could this be made better, right? And this is actually a very common Google product interview question, is to take a common service like, say, YouTube or Gmail. It's like, what do you not like about it? And what's an example of something if you could fix it or improve it that you would improve, and walk me through exactly what you're proposing. Now, a terrible answer to this interview question is, by the way, is, oh, YouTube is perfect. It's great. Don't change anything, right? Sometimes people maybe think that the right answer is to suck up to the interviewer, right? Because, I don't want to offend their company, right? And so I shouldn't suggest any changes. and that's completely the wrong mentality for a PM. I've seen that before. So don't do that. You should be a pretty opinionated person. Now, most people are, but they've got a sense of politeness, and they've also got a sense of thoroughness in having thought through the way that different experiences could be improved. So part of your job is to always have an eye for the user experience that you're going through, whether it's a physical product or a software product, and to be able to articulate, what would you fix about this? Tell me exactly what, right? And how hard do you think that would be to do? And then if you want to get a little edgy, why might you think that we haven't done that yet? And sometimes there isn't a good reason there, right? So don't assume that everything around you was built by superhuman, super intelligent people, because that's not the case. In terms of hiring, some of the other things that we look for. So I'm just going to go through the key rubrics of what we look for when we're hiring product managers at Google. So are you analytical? Do you know how to frame a problem and a solution in a coherent way? Do you have insights as to what the market is missing, to what offerings on the market are missing today? Are you sufficiently technical to be able to understand what kinds of things are possible to do, what kinds of things are not possible to do? And the critical part here is really, do you cause an allergic reaction when interacting with actual engineers, right? And the number one way that product managers do that is that they'll bullshit, right? They'll go and they'll confidently have technical opinions that are very, very wrong. And for a lot of engineers, they will run away screaming from a product manager who acts like that. And this can often happen from PMs who don't have a technical background, but feel like they need to say the technical keywords in order to be taken seriously by the technical team. And it turns out that a much better approach is to say confidently what you know confidently, to be able to reason from first principles about things that you don't know, while explaining and clearly articulating that you're your confidence level. If you're not sure, say you're not sure. And if you just legitimately don't know and don't know how to attack things from first principles, say you don't know and be curious about what the answer is. Because another thing that a lot of engineers love to do is to explain, right? And so if you're a willing pupil, if you're a willing student, that's a great way to build rapport with an engineer. And it causes the opposite reaction. If you charge on in with lots of technical lingo and it's super clear, you have no idea what you're talking about. It's okay if you don't know things, and it's okay to admit that you don't know things. In fact, part of your job as the PM is to be the dumb person in the room who raises their hand and says, that acronym you just used, I don't actually understand it. Can you explain it to me? And take things offline. Don't blow up a meeting for it. But chances are, if you have that question, other people in the room may have that question too. In fact, this has happened before at Google. I've been in meetings where people have been vigorously discussing a term and nobody understood what the term was until some dumb PM raised their hand and said, hey, I actually don't know what all of you are talking about. And it turned out that none of the people who were talking about it knew what they were talking about either. So it's a very useful role to play, to be the dumb person in the room. Don't be afraid to be the dumb person in the room. Don't try and look smart. Here are the other 3 key rubrics. Communication. Are you interactive? Are you kind of checking in with the people that you're talking with? Are you breaking things up? Are you presenting it in a compelling and exciting way that people can follow what you're saying? And some of this is, are you articulate? Do you mumble? Do you speak clearly? And are you fun to talk with, right? Creativity is number 2. This one's sort of obvious, being able to bring out-of-the-box thinking. Here's the funny part, is that a lot of people are fundamentally creative, but then they're afraid in a professional context to express that in an unencumbered way because it'll seem childish, it'll seem naive. And so they put themselves into this box of acceptability. Like, I have to be a candidate who's reasonable, like who everyone likes okay, right? And doesn't say anything terribly stupid or laughable, right? I don't want to be an embarrassment of a candidate. And that's a great way to make sure you don't get hired, okay? Just want to put that out there. What we are looking for when we hire product managers is people who are a little bit more out there. They can think rationally. They're not crazy, but they have ideas that seem crazy at first glance. And then the applicant can go and walk us through their thinking for why they would propose such a thing, right? And so it's this mixture of crazy and rational that we really look for. Because if you get somebody who just thinks in a very straightforward way and nothing's terribly objectionable, and I guess all of that makes sense, that's great for like a program manager or technical program manager. But part of the point of a product manager is they're bringing legitimately new thinking to a team. So it's not just that the team is operating well against the thing that they knew they needed to operate well against. That's very important. And somebody definitely needs to do that job. And that job is not the job of a product manager. The job of a product manager is to figure out what things need to be done that aren't being done today and get those things done and cause those things to be done, right? So that's why creativity is really important for the product manager role. And I would encourage anyone who's applying for a product management role to have their tidy answer and their crazy answer. And you kind of want to give both to show that you're rational and creative. So if somebody asks you an interview question, you lay out the structure for how you're going to answer it. Don't take too long about that. Don't dawdle, right? But lay out I'm going to have the structured answer for you. I'm going to go through, I'm going to give you some obvious answers for things that definitely make sense to do. And I'm going to give you 5% of my answer is going to be the batshit crazy stuff that's really out there, wacky thinking. And some of the ideas I'm going to give you are terrible ideas, but this is an interview. So I'm just tossing out these ideas and we'll talk through them together, right? And we'll come to an agreement about what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Because as an interviewer, I would far prefer to have a candidate blurt out something ridiculous, think through it, realize it was ridiculous and correct themselves, than to have a candidate who's quiet and thinking really hard because they want to make sure that they only say things that make sense, right? When somebody is talking through their thinking, even if they're saying ridiculous things, I get to peer inside their brain and see how they're thinking about it. And that's ultimately the job of the interviewer, is to assess, how is this person thinking? Are they creative and coming up with new ideas? And are they rational and able to assess the quality of those ideas? So Very important. And then from a culture perspective, some of this depends on company by company, but like Google's real values here, besides being technical, are somebody who's like excited to be working on technology, who's curious about the world, who's curious about how technology could positively influence the world, and has some data points to show that they're curious. Cool. I just want to pause there and check in if people have any questions about the hiring rubrics I just went over. Hello?
Okay, so if nobody's asking, I will ask.
Okay.
So David, can you share maybe one simple question from each of these rubrics? For example, if you're testing for communication, what will be a typical question like? Or if you're looking for creativity or judging, trying to figure out if the person is creative enough, what sort of question you might end up asking? If you can just share that, I think that will kind of spark some more ideas from the audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so oftentimes you'll have a question that will map against several of these and allow you to assess. And a lot of the questions are often fairly open-ended, right? And so I'll give you some, but I want to caveat it with if it's clear that a candidate has been asked a given question, has like a rehearsed answer to that question, that's definitely not what we're looking for. And interviews tend to be very interactive. And so I want to make sure everyone on this call has understood that, like, if I hand out a question, if you happen to be asked that question, the goal is not that you've memorized the correct answer, right, at all. The goal is to see how you think, right? But like one of the questions that I would use just to assess a number of different things is, you've been asked to design a better airport, right? They're going to swap out San Jose International Airport in South Bay, and they want to put something in its place that's better. What do you do? Right? And this kind of question that is open-ended in scope, it's not really defined. This weird word "better" got used, but doesn't really have any definition around it. What was wrong with the existing airport? Evoke a whole lot of different questions, and the interesting part in the interview is to assess the process that you'd use to get to an answer, but then to also have an opinion about given the data that you have, given what you know now, how would you answer that, and what might a better experience be, right? And so that it lets you communicate. Certainly creativity. It lets you communicate your analytic capabilities for figuring out a rubric for what better means. It allows you to show what insights you have about air travel and what works and what doesn't work today. It allows the candidate to show off some technical capabilities in terms of what might be possible for airports to do that they don't do today. And throughout the whole thing, the candidate's communicating, so you're assessing their communication capability. And then part of it is you also get culture. Are they excited and curious to be tackling problems, right? Or if they're basically just like, I don't know, airports work okay. And just they have some sort of de minimis answers which don't really show that they're excited about solving people's problems, or don't really have an ability to understand and care about other people's problems. Generally the form factor that I see, versus like, oh, here are the 3 creativity questions I ask, and here's the 1 culture question that I ask, and here's the communication question that I ask, right? It's more that each of the questions are fairly open-ended, and part of that you can take advantage of as a candidate, because open-ended questions you can steer towards things you care more about, things you've thought more about, things that you're more creative on, right? So for instance, for the airport side, like, maybe you happen to have some tremendous background in interior design, and the visual appearance of large interior spaces like airports just happens to be something that you've totally jammed on. Awesome. Maybe like RFIDs are your jam, right? And you've thought really hard about having millions and millions of little wireless sensors, and the idea of applying that at an airport scale and how that could transform the experience of an airport is totally your jam. Awesome, right? Maybe elevators are your thing, and hydraulic platforms just happen to be something that you're really passionate about and have lots of experience about. What could that look like in transforming a modern airport? You get to answer that, right? And so these open-ended questions are oftentimes almost a cheat code, a chance for a candidate to steer the conversation in a way that showcases their strengths, right? And so you should use it.
Yeah, myself, Avni, I'm an associate product manager in a startup called Peak.ai. So about that open-ended question, like, okay, I'm already doing the job, and sometimes happen that one team doesn't agree with another. So means you talk to the developers and engineers in another way, you talk to the customer success in another way, and you talk to the sales in another way. So what I generally face is when they all are in the same room, they are like, fighting, and how to make them on the same page in a common language. I still, struggle with that. So any advice on that, David?
It's a great question, and there's a couple different techniques that I've found really helpful for that. I don't know if you've read Difficult Conversations, but it touches on some of this. And you basically start by capturing the hard constraints from each of the different stakeholders and asking what must be true in a solution that will work for you and what must not be true. And so you collect all those constraints and those guardrails, right? And then once everyone's got those collected, hopefully there's still a solution space that's available that is within everyone's constraints. And then you're brainstorming for optimality, right? With all parties understanding that whatever you arrive at is going to be a trade-off, but that you're going to make a best effort to honor everyone's hard constraints. That way you make it a same side of the table exercise as you're sort of jointly visioning what do we want to come to fruition. And at the end of that, people can feel good because their input was heard. Where I think people get really frustrated is if they feel like nobody's listening to them, or they're only paying lip service, but they're not actually they're not actually using those constraints, or they're solving, not paying attention to what they had to say, right? So if everyone is same side of the table, feels heard, participates in the process, they don't have to 100% agree with the outcome, but they can agree with the process. And so that's actually another trick often, is that as you go into a meeting like that, you start by having everyone agree on the process. We're going to collect constraints. We're going to brainstorm around optimal solutions that meet those different hard constraints. There's going to be some compromise, and we're going to come up with an output that not everyone is 100% passionate about, but that we're going to try to run this in a way where everyone is heard and everyone is respected. Are we okay with that as a process? You get that sign off going in, and then you document what did we decide and why did we decide it, so you don't end up relitigating stuff. Because that, I find, is even more painful than a hard conversation, is having that hard conversation for the third time, right? Because nobody wrote down what the decisions were, why they were made.
Thank you. And one more thing around is like when you're like in a startup, you always work with so many different things. You have so many hats on, and especially when the product manager himself or herself doesn't know that, okay, what is going to be the solution of it? Like you're starting something really new. So how to tackle those kind of like conflicts when someone in the team wants to get it all done, and someone in the team has like few constraint over it, or maybe you have like zero clue about it. So what should you do? Like sometimes you just look like blank, or you don't have some answer. So means how to tackle that situation in particular?
Yeah, so as you articulated, at a startup, there's a lot of different cases when you need to do something and it's not clear how you can do it, right? So there's a couple different options that you have at your disposal. One is you can form credible hypotheses and try them out. So in particular, there may be certain things that are very easy to try out. So a shocking number of things can be very easily tried these days, which makes it kind of fun because, hey, I wonder if this messaging will resonate with this demographic. Well, it turns out 24 hours later, you can know because you put together a Facebook or a Google advertising campaign and some landing pages and saw what messaging resonated with what demographics, right? And so that's maybe my favorite form of learning, is to just go out there and figure what's the fastest, cheapest way you can learn this yourself, that you can start building that learning muscle of getting better and better at the thing that you need to become good at. There's the obvious of reaching out to peers, reaching out to mentors who have solved this class of problem before, and to be aggressive about it. One interesting source of knowledge is people who have founded companies in the space that aren't involved with those companies anymore. They know an incredible amount and they're not conflicted. And so you can just go and look them up on LinkedIn, go and ping them, write 2 paragraphs that explains why you want to talk to them in particular. And a shocking number of people, not 100%, but a shocking number of people be like, yeah, I'd love to talk with you about this because this is an area that they that they dug into deep, that they care about, and if you're curious about that, they're happy to share their knowledge. One trick that I learned at Facebook actually, that most people don't do, is that if you need to become better in a given area, if you have problems in a given subject domain, buy the book on the topics. Oftentimes there'll be like an introductory textbook on the topic, and you can just go and buy the textbook and read through the textbook. And almost nobody does this, which is kind of amazing. If you walk through a modern professional workforce, and what percentage of the people are reading books at their desk? And it's like 0.1%, right? But boy, you want to pay attention to those that 0.1% that are sitting at their desk reading a book, right? Provided it's not some goofy novel. But those people are focused on learning and take their task seriously as knowledge workers. And it's such a hilariously obvious hack. That it almost feels like a cheat code because it's like the Matrix, right? Just kind of plugging in. It's like I want to learn about this subject. So I'm a huge fan of books. It's a really dumb thing to say maybe, but like if there's a book out there that can teach you how to become better at a thing, go buy that book and read it. It's incredibly well spent money. So there's a couple of these different ways. Yeah.
Hi, David.
Hi.
This is Yatish here. My question is more related towards from the interview perspective for people who want to move into a product management role, but do not have an experience in that background. Where I'm coming from is that I have an experience as an SAP consultant and a BA, and now post my MBA, I am working as a BA for a product, but I want to move into a product management role. So like from whatever I've seen or heard from people is that a product management role requires you to have some knowledge at least on a product stack or a system architecture, APIs, wireframes, etc. So coming from a non-tech background, how can we convince the interviewer to hire us?
So the short answer is it depends on the company. At a lot of companies, they are looking for somebody with a reasonably deep technical background, full stop. So if you want to be a PM at Google, you need to be technical. You need to know how to program. You need to know how to talk to engineers, right? At other places, it varies. So like Facebook is very interesting because Facebook PM culture is a bigger tent, I would say. There are highly data-centric PMs who are very comfortable in R and Python and do a lot of data analysis, maybe have PhDs in sociology. There are design-oriented PMs and kind of UX-oriented PMs, and there's sort of more classic computer science PMs. At Google, it's mostly computer science PMs. You get some MBAs, but they're often CS undergrad, MBA after. And so a lot of the answer there really depends on which company in particular you're looking to become a PM at. I do have a little bit in my deck here for people transitioning into PM, and just some of the things that you want to look out for there. In particular, there may be other job roles or job ladders that are equally interesting and have equal or greater impact that may be a better fit depending. So a classic one that I give people is that people assume that there's a lot of people management and product management. And actually at Google in particular, there's really not. They don't even let you begin doing people management until you're at a very, very senior level. That may surprise people for whom they wrongly think about the PM as the CEO of the product, because CEO even of a very small company is, by definition, everyone's reporting up through them. They get hiring and firing responsibility. So there are individual contributor PM directors. So these are people who are responsible for overseeing the work of hundreds of engineers that have nobody reporting to them. And that's actually not super uncommon. So it's definitely the wrong job ladder, like if people management is your jam. So this again gets into like, well, why do you want to become a PM? One common bit is that we get a bunch of program managers who are very good at articulating process and taking things through a program management process who want to become PMs. And often at Google, we find it's easier if they first transition from PM, from program manager to technical program manager, from PGM to TPGM. And that is a good first step to explore having their job role be more technical. And then they'll separately then transition from TPM to product manager. Similarly, if you love to code, PM's a terrible role. So let's see, those are some internal bits, and this is this is relevant to your question, Yatish, which is that if you're trying to understand, if you're trying to show that you can be a technical product manager without technical experience, being a technical founder of a startup is a great way to show that, because you'll end up having to exercise a lot of PM skills as well as a bunch of technical skills. And something that I encourage people to do is just go ahead and start building some side projects. They can be projects that feel almost embarrassingly small or simple, but that practice of actually building things and putting them out there in the world will help you a lot. Does that answer your question, Yatish?
Yes. Thanks, David. This was actually quite relevant, this particular slide.
Cool. Wonderful.
Thank you.
So let's see. I got a couple questions in here in the chat. So Vishal asks how to approach open-ended questions like how to design a car for a 10-year-old. So for any of these sort of open-ended questions, I think where you want to start is to lay out the architecture of your answer. And don't dawdle on this. Don't spend all of your answer in the kind of meta answer. Like, make sure you dive in really quick, but just say, like, okay, well, we want to assess what are the core needs of 10-year-old car drivers. what do we think they're actually trying to get done? How big is this market? Are there, given the needs that we're trying to fill, are there a lot of people with those needs? Do we feel like it's a valuable market? And then what things would need to be true of a great solution for those folks? And then now we've mapped out, some of this should sound familiar now. Hey, wait a minute. So we've mapped out the constraints. Now we can brainstorm for optimality in terms of different possible solutions inside that. And that then lets us start proposing credible hypotheses, right? And then you can start saying, okay, well, here's this specific idea that I have that meets all the constraints that I outlined. And here's how we're going to go and bring it to market. Here are the first niche markets where we're going to try launching. And then here's our expansion plan. Right, and so you've basically gone soup to nuts, thinking about your user's pain points, different things that need to be true for a solution. You've shown that you're creative and can come up with an interesting example solution. You've shown that you're analytical and that you're going to how you're going to go and measure the success of the thing, and then you've mapped out a go-to-market there. Vishal, hope that begins to answer your question on how to approach open-ended questions. Let's see. Hajar asks, what are some of the best books that you'd recommend? Well, here's a good one. The Hard Thing About Hard Things is a pretty solid one. There's Blitzscaling is also a good one. There's The Lean Startup as well by Eric Ries. Those are some classics. But overall, I would say product management, I know I recommended books, and generally speaking, I think books are amazing and a great idea. But I would say product management is largely kinesthetic practice. So most of what you will learn, you'll learn by doing it. And that's part of why on this slide, for instance, I suggest just go ahead and build something, and you'll find that that's a really effective way to start learning the practice of product management is by doing it, not just reading about it. Rizwan asked, what is the difference between a program manager and a technical program manager? It's right there in the T, but this is Google-specific parlance that a program manager is not necessarily expected to have any technical background. They're really just expected to be able to design and execute a process and kind of check in with people. But a technical program manager is expected to not only be doing that, but also to be playing a really key role in doing technical assessments about what work should be done and shouldn't be done, technical sizing, and providing more guidance with technical insights on the processes to go about using. Hemanth, apologies if I'm butchering people's names, I'm very sorry. Hi David, how important is the education background for experienced PMs in Google? Do we really have to be from Ivy League universities? No. Is Google open to candidates from tier 2 universities with 4 to 6 years of prior product management experience? Yes, and just don't internalize it as a tier 2 university. Like, different people have different experiences. This is not something where Google's only looking at people from very certain backgrounds. I think if you can show that you've got a great track record as a PM launching and iterating on products in a really effective way, that you'll be able to get hired. I mean, it's some of it is that the hiring process at Google's kind of messed up. Yeah, I feel like I can be really blunt about that, especially being post-Google now, that it's a lot of it is due to chance. Just to put it out there, I know a lot of amazing candidates that were rejected by Google. And some of it was just that they got very unlucky with who they got paired with in their interview process. And they'll actually acknowledge that. That's actually the interesting bit, is that the hiring process at Google is designed so that good people get in, and they reject a huge number of people, and they even acknowledge that that their process is broken in that they end up rejecting a very large number of very well qualified people. So a lot of it is just the luck of the draw in terms of who you end up getting paired with in terms of your interview and in terms of your recruiter as well. So just want to put that out there. So don't be dismayed. It's funny because I had applied to Google 3 different prior times and was rejected prior to getting accepted and then doing well at Google. I have a very good friend who is the CEO of a 300-person startup. And his Google hiring process took over 9 months, soup to nuts, with many different rounds of interviews and, I don't think we have a role for you, before he eventually was placed. And now he's there and kicking butt as a PM director, right? So it can be a bumpy ride for a lot of people, even people internally who I was coaching through this path to PM. So just wanted to give that kind of color to things. Chandrakant asks, how important is it to find out the ROI of your UX before actually getting into the implementation phase of a product? This question could mean a couple different things. So part of the goal of a product manager is to minimize the amount of time that their team is wasting building the wrong thing. And I think that's kind of what is being gotten at here. There are a lot of different ways to rapidly prototype different design concepts and put them in front of people. So paper prototyping is one way to do this. And the design tooling has also evolved considerably. So at my startup, Medcorder, that I'm working on, we use a design tool called Figma that allows everyone, all of our designers, all of our front-end engineers, to be looking at pixel perfect, exactly the same screens. And there's even a companion app that you put on your phone that allows click-through prototypes to really let you feel, what will this look like if it's an app? All right, that's pretty cool. So there's a lot of tools that are out there that can quickly let you explore different visual ideas without even having to really build them, and that'll give you a feel for, is this the right user flow? Is this going to help people? Upender Kasam asks, I have 20 years experience in telecom domain IT technical consulting with project program management experience. How to move to director/senior director level role to manager products? What are the reskills required? Boy, I don't have a pat answer for that. I mean, it sounds like you've got great technical depth, and you've got good project and program management experience. So like the ingredients are there. The thing that if I was assessing a candidate who presented with that background, the main thing I'd push them on would be creativity. Because that's one thing that you might have been able to get away with not being tremendously creative while having a successful career as a technical consulting expert and a project and program manager. So can somebody think about the business side of things? Can somebody go and build a business plan that makes sense? And can somebody be really creative and out of the box? So just those would be the areas that I'd be assessing there. So there's a bunch more questions here on the question. Is an MBA degree necessary to get into the PM role? I don't have an MBA. I would say more than half of the PMs I worked with at Google did not have MBAs. So there were a lot of MBAs, that's for sure, but you definitely don't need one to get into Google. Getting an MBA doesn't help at all with creativity. Actually, there's some evidence that getting an MBA hurts your creativity. But it does help with how you structure your answers, how you communicate, and how you're able to form and articulate business plans. So one part is going to be weaker, the other part will be stronger. So if I get an MBA candidate, I can be pretty sure that they'll have a nicely structured and analytical form factor for an answer about different prospective businesses, doing a TAM analysis, CAC analysis, LTV analysis. But I'll be pushing them hard on the creativity side. I'll also be pushing them hard on the technical front to see whether or not they bullshit, because MBA candidates bullshit like none other. They're used to it, and they're used to getting away with it, especially if they've done a consulting gig at Boston Consulting Group or McKinsey or any of those guys. So that's something that I try and filter out there. Are PM roles considered a more demanding and stressful role compared to a technical business UX role? If PM doesn't get more respect pay, why should someone consider getting into that role? Great question. So in terms of demanding and stressful, gosh, everybody feels like their job is pretty demanding and stressful, right? So I don't know that it's any more or less stressful than other parts of the business. If PMs don't get more respect and pay, why should someone consider getting into that role? Really, it's a matter of, you can't help it, right? If there's a certain temperament where you love to nitpick constructively and specifically at the universe around you, and you've got really concrete thoughts about things that ought to exist that don't exist today, and you're determined to go and make those things exist, and that's just part of who you are, great. You're probably a PM. And so really it's like, well, why should assume all jobs have equal respect, assume all jobs have equal pay, why should anyone do any job? And the answer should be because they're good at it, and because they like it, and because it's useful, right? and so you should do things that you like doing, that you're good at doing, and that are useful to do, right? And PM just happens to be one of those ways that you can add value to a company. let's see, as a PM, how do you decide the number of features a product should have for the launch? It's challenging to limit the features. Almost all stakeholders have new ideas, good and bad, correct? Hence making the product way too complicated or delays the product. So a bad PM will just go and take all of the features and say, we need to do all of them. We'll do a kitchen sink release. The release will slip because it takes a long time to go and ship something with a huge number of features, right? So there's a bitter saying in the engineering world that the more product managers you hire, the more features are going to end up in the product, right? And that's true of a junior product manager. And the junior product manager views their role is to advocate for features getting built. And they need to do a good job being the voice of the customer, that this feature needs to get built because this customer needs it built, right? And that's a very sort of junior mentality. A senior product manager says the product that wins is going to be elegantly crafted, and the common things that people need to do are almost going to be thoughtless. They're going to be so easy to do. And the hard but critical things that somebody needs to do, our users are going to be able to figure out how to do those things. And the things that are more niche or edge case that aren't all that valuable, that not all that many people need to do, maybe we don't need to do them. Maybe we can drop that feature, right? And so for a senior product manager, they'll come in and they'll kill products, they'll kill features, and they'll have things be really focused and clear and crisp and simple versus just sort of expansive and it does everything in the universe. So that's one way of thinking about how to decide the number of features a product should have for the launch. Ultimately, like my opinion on this is the answer is as few features as possible. The minimum viable product. What does it need to be incrementally more useful for the user? And if you've got something that could be more useful for a user, then ship it and learn about it, because you'll have gotten some things wrong and you'll learn about what you got wrong by actually shipping it and putting it in people's hands. Siddhant asks, as the technologies are changing like AI, big data, VR, etc., what are the key skills we need to upgrade on for being future relevant? So I wouldn't worry too much about AR, VR, or crypto. Those are just like my 2 cents there. In terms of AI and big data, they're kind of two sides of the same coin, because it ultimately comes down to collecting large data sets, structuring those data sets, visualizing and rationalizing what's in those data sets, and then training models off of those data sets. And ultimately that comes down to tools that can be used to organize, visualize, and sort through large quantities of data. So I'm a big fan of Python and using Jupyter notebooks and NumPy and SciPy to go in and slice data sets, pandas, right? And then the other aspect of that is just numeracy, being able to think statistically and to reason statistically. And so I would say fluency with that sort of state-of-the-art in data science and that tooling, which is all open source, which is amazing, right? Combined with sort of basic knowledge of statistics is going to serve people very, very well. So what are the skills and capabilities required for product market strategy roadmap? I think being able to put together something credible, right? Do you have an idea for a product that really ought to exist? Who would use it? So how big is the market? What are the market demographics? On what basis does your customer make a purchasing decision? How much purchasing authority do they have? Is the user the same as the purchaser? Critical difference between enterprise product management and consumer product management. You mentioned price here, Pendar, and part of that is also taking a look at from what budget does that purchasing come, and what other purchases are from there? Is this offsetting another expenditure that they're already making, or is it strictly additive, asking them to spend more money? Is this part of cost of goods sold in terms of helping to facilitate growing their business? Is it a cost of revenue, or is it administrative overhead? A lot of people accidentally build models where they're asking for additive cost versus replacement cost, and it's administrative cost versus cost of goods sold, right? And that ends up being a really tough sell because IT only has so many dollars, right? There's just one of these things where thinking about who pays, why do they pay, from what budget is really helpful in going and building out a business plan. Neha asks, could you elaborate on what could be a key driver of product failure? For example, maybe over-engineering a product. So the biggest one is you build something that it turns out people don't want. Whether it's too confusing to use, whether it was poorly messaged, whether it just didn't work and broke all the time, or whether fundamentally the problem you were trying to solve wasn't that big of a problem for people. That sort of lack of a product market fit is ultimately what kills most products. And at the end of the day, that comes down to a lack of empathy in terms of correctly understanding what real pain points people have and how to meet them. And that's basically the primary cause of failure of most products and most startups. Secondary is running out of money. Whether that's internal funding, whether that's sort of VP appetite to continue financing something that hasn't taken off yet, or whether that's venture capital financing, and that just maybe it's a long game and it requires more product development. Then it turns out that the market had appetite to finance, right? So that's another failure mode. But probably the biggest one, especially the one that's most in control of a product manager, is that the team spent a lot of resources building something that people at the end of the day didn't really want. And your job as a PM is to avoid that fate. Question from Nikhil. I believe that pricing of a product is a function of cost and the value it delivers. Cost, we can analyze how to go about finding out value. So there's basically two different ways of looking at pricing. One is how can I put a cost out there that makes sense, rationalized to the budget that you have for it. And that's very much on the additive cost kind of part of the process. And then the other bit is how do I become a core part of your business and part of cost of goods sold? And that's actually much more the value-based pricing. And that's where you get much more exciting market dynamics, is like, this is not something extra I'm asking you to spend money on that's gonna hurt your margins. Rather, I'm gonna bring new business to you and I'm gonna be part of how your business runs. And therefore I can charge as a percentage of the value that I'm bringing to you, right? And that tends to be how you end up getting paid a lot. So for instance, if I think about if I was selling you a piece of software to install that helps with design, I'm going to price it against Photoshop or something, right? And it's like, is it better than Photoshop? Probably not. Therefore, I expect it to be cheaper than Photoshop, right? You sort of get into an interesting spot in doing that. But then if you make what these days is called design ops tooling that allows my designer to do more than they could have done, that minimizes the confusion and complexity in handing things off from design to front-end engineering, then I start thinking about in terms of the opportunity cost of my designer's time, the opportunity cost of my front-end engineer's time. And that number is a lot larger of a number in terms of what that's worth to me per year than the cost of Photoshop, right? And so a lot of it is, are you helping the team do more? Are you helping the business operate better? Or are you just like a raw expense that's there? All right, we're a little bit over time now. My deep apologies that I did not get to absolutely everybody's questions here. Wonderful set of questions in the group chat. So thank you so much for the interactiveness and the participation here. I really appreciate it.